Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. I've just been listening to us chit chat. This is day 2 of Locus Awards readings. I'm very excited. Tonight we have Thomas Ha and Naomi Kritzer here to read, who are both finalists for Locus Awards. There's a Q&A button if you want to put questions in the Q&A. We will, if you queue, we will A. There's a chat if you want to chat amongst yourselves. There is closed captioning if that's useful to you. We will record this, so if you want to come back and watch it over and over again, you can do that. Later on, when I actually edit it down a little and we might lose the jokes. So you are the people who were here earlier will be the only ones who will see the jokes. But we will have the two readers read, and then we will have Q&A at the end. And without any further ado, as they say, I will get us started. So, Thomas Ha is a Nebula Locus and Shirley Jackson Award nominated writer of speculative short fiction. You can find his work in Clarkesworld, Lightspeed Magazine, Beneath Ceaseless Skies, and Weird Horror Magazine, among other publications. His work has also appeared in the year's Best Dark Fantasy and Horror, and is forthcoming in Best American Science Fiction Fantasy. Nice. Thomas grew up in Honolulu, and after a decade plus of living in the Northeast, now resides in Los Angeles with his wife and 3 children. Please welcome Thomas Ha.
Hey, everybody. Thank you for having me. I was telling everyone before in the chit chat that I've never done anything with Locus before, so this is like the peak of anything I've done. Super cool. Thank you for having me. Happy to be sharing this hour with Naomi. So I'm just going to jump into it. I'm reading a short story from Choreo magazine. I think a lot of people are familiar with it, but just in case you're not, they're an awesome short spec fic magazine that focuses on immigrant and diaspora stories with a speculative lens on them. And this story came out last year in their spring issue. And it is a sci-fi story called For However Long. Here we go. My son sent me a birthday card the other day. A digitally painted holograph of dinosaurs that dance across the edge of my desk, most of them playing bugles, trombones, and French horns, with a few carrying a banner that reads, "Hope you have a great one, Mom." The data package from Korolev must have been fairly expensive, I realize. It would have traveled almost 400 million kilometers over the course of at least 20 minutes, not accounting for compression, decompression. So I feel more than a bit ungrateful when I can't fully bring myself to enjoy the gesture. It's probably because my editor's still emailing me about the Martian Mother piece, the one he thinks will connect with the thousands of parents who found their children scattered to the solar winds, to the crater cities somewhere on that faraway red planet. He's angling for a feel-good human interest story, he tells me, a sense of what it's like to be an ordinary mama, looking off from the repose of her rocking chair, bosom swelling with maternal pride at the thought of those brave explorers, a story about the optimism and magnificence of science fiction made into science reality. But watching the projection of those miniature dinosaurs buzzing around with that cloying brass band, my eyes linger on one of the smallest, dawdling toward the back, the kind with a long neck that I can never remember, Brachiosaurus or Brontosaurus. This feels more like a ghost story than science fiction to me. People on different planes with little contact between the living and dead, save after images strewn back and forth alongside starlight. It makes me think about the credenza next to the dining room and just before the umbrella stand, where I keep my favorite pictures of my son, a half dozen moments of a baby and a boy and a young man in a series of frames with recognizable continuity between them on some days, but on others so stark and so different that he begins to feel like a collection of separate people, all of whom are long gone. Lately, when I stop there to catch my breath or to look for my car keys, I get this strange and unmistakable sense that I'm fixed before an altar at a memorial. When I tell people that I feel like I'm the mother of a ghost, they laugh, not cruelly, but gently, reassuringly, to remind me that my son is in space, not gone forever. They talk about the Turners they know, maybe a church friend's child or a colleague or relative, and how my son might be one of them, the ones who return rather than renew their initial contracts, because everyone gets tired and wants the comfort of stable soil eventually, or so they say. But they don't know my son. They didn't see the glint, the joy sparking under the skin the day he told me about his plan to enroll in the IAES, when there was already early talk about the academy becoming a feeder for the second wave. Back when he was a shaggy-haired teenager who still needed me to buy his jeans and microwave his food, when his interests in water conservation and filtration were starting to take his studies to terrain I already had trouble understanding. Even then, I could tell he wouldn't look back, because I never did when it was my time to leave everything behind. When it was me sitting at a cramped dining table talking to my mother about a job at a paper in Seattle. My small and cautious mother, who spent her whole life as a secretarial assistant, never going more than a few dozen miles from Concord, and who couldn't fathom what it would mean for her daughter to be a writer, didn't hesitate, just smiled and nodded and told her child she was happy, the same way I did when it was my kid going on about the IAES. I watched that projected dinosaur still dancing, waving its neck back and forth and tooting that little bugle, and I think about what separates us from the dead. Such a small difference, time and place. And I consider perhaps that I'm the one that's the ghost. Sitting here in the first and only home I ever bought, rain thumping the skylight and curves of the roof tiles, gushing gutters, dumping tangles of twigs and dirt into the side yard, I'm a lot less moored in time. 1 second, I'm staring at a digital birthday card. The next, I'm crawling in darkness, reaching and swiping under the slats of a toddler bed, while my son shrieks for his dinosaur toy so violently that he can barely breathe. Barry the Brachiosaurus or Brontosaurus. I still don't know. A blue, goofy-eyed doll matted in spit and unvacuumed dust when I pull it up from the depths. Too tired to stop my son from burying his face in it as he falls asleep. Bury, a word that's less than a glimmer in my son's thoughts. So much so, I'm certain that he chose the birthday card without remembering any of that crying and crawling and reaching at all. It's the recognition that I'm quickly coming to speak a language no one understands, that this knowledge will disappear, is disappearing somewhere within me. I haven't told him this, but I've calculated our remaining time. He and his wife say that they're planning to visit Earth again after they have kids at a good stage in both of their research careers. It'll be important for the grandkids to see where they come from, the people they come from, they tell me. And so based on that, I tried to estimate at least 2 or 3 trips they might make. Costly trips, not just in resources, but in time, 5 to 10 months, depending on the planetary positions. Even if my son and daughter-in-law are allowed more than a few weeks leave, even if they stay with me a month or 2 with each visit home, that's 6 months or less that I'll be in the same time and place as my son. 6 months at most, and then never again. People talk a lot about a third wave these days. Projections and estimates of when national governments and their corporate partners may open up Mars to commercial travelers, not just qualified researchers. Some say it could be as soon as 10 years that relatives and loved ones might apply for visas and take up residence in the dust. It gives me a newfound sympathy for my mother in Concord, those many calls I'd have where I'd tell her about my life, how I really wouldn't mind grandma's help if only she were just a little bit closer, those times she'd send checks and her love, but could never seem to bring herself around to starting again out here, like she'd dropped an anchor in the Northeast and that was all there was to it. I recall that she'd always suggest, especially in those early years, that I could still consider coming back if Seattle didn't work out, maybe find something at a local magazine or a teaching position at one of the charter schools. She tried to lure me with crisp and snowy Christmases, talk about how pure and white everything was, with a sheen from lights hanging off all the houses, perfect to look at as she sipped a soothing peppermint tea. But the thing was, I never loved the snow as much as she did, with the crunching and the shoveling and the caked, staining salt of it all. For me, it was the storms up in my new apartment, the sound of the water plinking and pattering on every surface, the dampness in your hair and cooling your throat. For me, it was always the rain. It's the same way my son describes the Martian sky, I realized. The flowing dust, scattering light to a deep red when you're looking away from the sun, or spilling out in a beautiful fractured blue around the horizon, a reverse Earth sunrise or sunset. I can just tell when he writes about it. That's his rain. If I were to draft the Martian Mother piece my editor wants, it wouldn't be about space settlers and terraforming and resource development and the like. It would be about the rain and the dust and the snow, about toys and pictures and words that lose importance, how it doesn't matter whether it's a cross-country plane through the air or a shuttlecraft through a vacuum. When there's a distance, and there's no getting back from it. After I calculated that my son and I had maybe 6 months, I figured out, based on letters and pictures and old calendars, how many visits my mother and I had worked out between us. There were 2 holidays in Concord, 4 summers when she came out here, a couple of years when I was doing a regular column and couldn't set aside the time for a trip, and then one last beach vacation we all took when my son was 8 or 9. After that, it was harder for her to travel on her own. Even when I round up, we didn't manage much more than 6 months either. The thought takes me back to the panic, calling from the airport lounge to tell the nurses my flight was going to be coming in the morning, when the morphine drip was still light and she could talk, drowsy and quiet though it was, when she told them to tell me something I didn't understand then, but will never forget. Don't worry too much about goodbye, she said. We've been saying plenty. From the first talk about Seattle at the dining table until I hung up that airport phone, it was just a number of gradual goodbyes until the last. My son doesn't know it, but he won't even have the comfort of that call when it's his turn to reach out, when he's guilty and afraid. Part of me wants to tell him now, I get what she meant. The goodbye already happened, and it's okay. I am okay. The times when I'm a little less full of self-pity and dread, when I can remember that he's digging soil and testing samples while I'm scraping together words at my keyboard, I remind myself that neither of us is dead, of course. My life goes on, with deadlines and wine glasses and walls of dog-eared books, a beautiful son who sends pictures of alien vistas overlooking oceans of dirt, and digital birthday cards that dance across my desk. It's just, I didn't know how little overlap there'd be. A handful of years that were barely a fraction of our lives when all's added up, an island of a decade or so, when I was working around the clock, barely resting my head on a pillow, with baby vomit and food crusted on the edges of my sleeves, when it was me and him, and every once in a while my mother. That was the time. And on nights when I finish tinkering with words and I'm listening to the rainfall from under the comforters, I imagine the three of us in a kind of chain, my mother and me tethering him to the planet as he goes farther and farther. I drift off next to the empty wine glass into blackness, picturing an improbable way of being, all of us insubstantial and together for however long. And that's it.
Excellent, because you can't hear anybody else clapping.
Hmm.
I forgot to mention that when you're done, I have to do a certain amount of fumbling to actually come back. And so I'm always like, I feel bad because people are like, and I'm done.
And that's it.
He's here. Okay. Let me grab my handy dandy thing. Thank you so much. That was awesome, and we will have questions for you. But first, we have Naomi Kritzer. Naomi Kritzer is a science fiction and fantasy writer from St. Paul, Minnesota. Her fiction has won the Hugo Award, Edgar Award, Locus Award, and Nebula Award. She has a spouse, 2 grown kids, and 3 cats. The number of cats is subject to change without notice. You can find Naomi online at naomikritzer.com or on Blue Sky as at Naomi Kritzer, and her latest book, Liberty's Daughter, came out last November. Please welcome Naomi Kritzer.
All right, I'm gonna read from an unpublished novella called Dressed in Possibility. So obviously I'm not going to read the whole novella. I'm gonna read the first bit. So this is called Dressed in Possibility, and chapter 1 is called Seeing. My sister Meredith was born in a hospital because her father insisted. I was born at home in a tub, and I was born in the call. Technically, all that means is that my bag of waters didn't break until I was all the way out. I've seen the pictures. They're kind of gross. But Mom said a call birth made you special. A call birth meant that I would have the sight. Mom worked as a fortune teller on the Renaissance Festival circuit. She was good at telling people's fortunes, but she didn't have the sight herself. She'd said as much when she explained to us how to do a cold reading. People tell you what they need to hear, she said. You make yourself a mirror that shows them their own face, dressed in possibility. It's not a bad thing. It's just not actual magic. It's not real magic, not like you'll be able to do, Cassie, when you come into your powers. For most of the year, Meredith and Mom and I lived in a camper, driving from one regional Ren fair to the next. Mostly the ones we went to lasted 4 to 6 weekends, although there were smaller fairs here and there that my mom hit up because they brought in lucrative customers. Mare's dad still lived in California. My dad was someone Mom met at the Ren fair. Which someone? I asked once, and she got annoyed and said, I didn't actually want him involved. And then she thought of something and said, once you come into your powers fully, you should be able to find him, if you want to. When you come into your powers was what Mom said instead of when you're older, but only when she was talking to me. Meredith wasn't born in the call. She could learn to tell fortunes like Mom, but she'd never have the sight. Mom's tent said, Madame Vanessa, seeress, clairvoyant, medium on the front. She had a setup with 2 comfortable chairs that faced each other across a small table, and soft lighting that made the people coming in from outside feel like they just stepped into a dim room, but gave Mom enough light to see faces while she worked. There was a curtain across the back of the tent to make a little room for me and Meredith. We had child-sized folding chairs and tablets with headphones so we could watch videos, staying quiet as mice when there was a client in the tent. Can I take Cassie and go see one of the shows? Meredith sometimes asked. Not the one with all the dirty jokes. One of the juggling shows. When you're older, Mom said, when you're big enough to catch Cassie if she tries to run. I'd been a runner as a toddler and had once gone missing for 2 hours. Mom didn't like the idea of letting me out of easy reach. If Mom was busy all through lunch, we were allowed to go buy ourselves soup in a bread bowl from the food vendors across the path from the psychics. I was sipping clam chowder one dazzlingly sunny Saturday the year I was 6 when Meredith narrowed her eyes and said, do you want to go see the jugglers? You know, the Firefly jugglers end with a pie fight. Mom said we can't, I said. I'm not saying we should disobey Mom. I'm saying I know a way to convince Mom, but you have to help. I sipped my soup and swung my feet and waited for Meredith to keep talking. Tell Mom that your powers told you it's safe there and dangerous here. But they didn't, I said. My powers haven't come in yet. Mom doesn't know that. But what if it's not true? Twice in the last 5 years, women had disappeared from festivals and never been found, even with Mom doing her best to keep people from talking about it in front of us. We'd heard some lurid speculation. We'll be fine, Meredith said. We'll be at a show surrounded by people. We'll sit and watch, and then we'll go back to the tent. Doesn't that sound more interesting than watching Snow White's about her? Mare met my eyes, nodded. I guess I can try. We finished our lunch and went back to Mom's tent, Meredith lifting up the back edge so I could crawl in. I sat with Meredith and listened to Mom and her customer. She was doing a palm reading. I see a long lifeline here, Mom said, but I sense you're here for something specific. A matter of the heart, perhaps? Ah, yes, I see. A heart that's aching. Loneliness. You're wondering if you'll ever find someone, again. I heard a wheezing sob. The customer was crying. Oh, my dear, I see great heartbreak. May I offer you a tissue? Would you like to tell me a bit about the one who broke your heart? I strained to hear the details. She'd been engaged. He'd left her for a woman she'd considered a friend. My mother let her talk, making sympathetic noises I was pretty sure were genuine. Then she returned to the woman's hand, telling her that the creases on her palm told a story where this was not the sad ending, but the beginning. True love was waiting, not this season, when her heart was still so raw, but arriving with the cool autumn breezes. She should look for a man with a kind smile, someone who would make her laugh, who would wrap his coat around her on a chilly night. The pain of the heartbreak would be healed. She would look back at her ex-fiancé and realize that she'd never loved him the way she loved the new person. It was a nice story. Sometimes it was hard to remember my mother was just making it all up. When the tent was quiet, I popped my head around the curtain and said, Mom? The show Meredith had her eye on would start in 15 minutes. It was now or never. Do you need something, sweetie? I came the rest of the way into the tent. I'd thought a bit about what I thought it would look like if I did have the sight, and I really wasn't sure. So I tried, can you tell me what it will feel like when my powers first start coming in? I don't know exactly, sweetie. Why do you ask? Because I kind of had a feeling today, maybe, I'm not sure. Mom arched an eyebrow at me quizzically, so I kept on talking. I had this feeling, a really strong feeling, that if Meredith took me to a show like she asked if she could maybe do, we'll be perfectly, perfectly safe. And if we're here, we won't be. Don't be silly, Mom said. If you're here, I can keep you safe. What could possibly happen to you here? I don't know, I said, but when I pictured us in the tent, I felt a lurch, like a stomach ache. Like, I don't know, it just felt bad. I think it's my powers telling me we should go to the show. I was 100% making this up. When I pictured us in the tent, what I felt was a vague sense of boredom. It would be another Saturday at a Renaissance festival, like every other Saturday at a Renaissance festival, and I would be sitting in the back of a tent with a fan plugged in to an extension cord and a video screen with headphones, watching some Disney movie for the 1,000th time. Actually, maybe I did feel a lurch. Maybe this was a bad feeling. Mom, I said, I'm serious. All right, she said, you two can go to the show, but you need to come back as soon as it's over. I could not believe that it had worked. But Meredith had been listening and managed to contain herself to, oh gosh, Mom, of course I will keep Cassie safe. And then she swept me off to the family stage where we could sit on the ground at the front for a perfect view, as long as we didn't mind the occasional splatters of pie at the end. When we were done, we headed back to Psychic Alley, and as we approached, we heard actual screaming. Meredith blanched and dragged me back towards the family stage. I told Mom I would keep you safe. She said, whatever's happening there isn't safe. But Mom's there. Mom is a grown-up, and she will take better care of herself if she doesn't think we are anywhere nearby. It wasn't a shooting, that was my first thought, or a bear, that was my second thought. I was on the right track with wildlife incident. Wasps had built an enormous nest under one of the permanent buildings, and no one had noticed until a structurally unsound board had given way. The result was a swarm of furious yellow jackets descending on Psychic Alley. Mom got stung 6 times, and her customer, who got stung twice, demanded a refund. I don't know why she didn't ask the fair for a refund, Mom said morosely, holding an ice pack against her arm to bring down the swelling. Maybe she did that next, Meredith said. Anyway, wasn't it clever of Cassie to keep her and me safe? Mom's eyes filled up with tears, and she said, I never imagined such power in my own child. Meredith shot me a triumphant look. We both knew the wasps were a coincidence, but we also knew that this ploy was going to keep working as long as we didn't overplay our hand. And maybe this was my powers, I thought later, as Meredith made spaghetti over the camp stove while Mom nursed her still swollen arm. I'd felt that lurch, after all. I'd always sort of assumed that second sight would work like a movie that would run behind my closed eyelids, but maybe that wasn't it. After dinner, I fetched water for Meredith to use to clean up while Mom went to lie down in the camper. When Meredith and I had gotten the food packed away where raccoons wouldn't get it, I climbed into Mom's end of the camper to see if she was still awake. Mom, I said, can you show me how to read palms? Mom propped herself up on her elbow and turned on a lantern, then patted the bed next to her and let me crawl up beside her. She turned her own hand palm up and set my hand next to hers. Lifeline, heartline, headline. Fate, money, marriage. She drew over each of the lines on our palms. Everyone calls it the lifeline, but if I'm reading someone with a short one, I call it the vitality line because it doesn't really say how long you'll live. It's more, will you be healthy? Are you full of energy? Not that a short one is ever good, but I don't want someone leaving my tent thinking she's going to drop dead of a bee sting at 32 or whatever. People can die of bee stings. Mom meandered off into an explanation of bee sting allergies. Apparently Meredith's father had one. Then Mom traced her own heartline and added, he existed in black and white and gray, and he wanted me to live in black and white like him. Some men are like that. Some men are worse. Does your heartline think you'll get married again? I asked. She traced mine, and said, he was older than I should have wanted. He said he was 800 years old, which was ridiculous, but he did look 50, probably. Too old for me. And he said he'd give me a daughter and never bother me again, which he did, so I don't know why. She closed her hand up and looked at mine again. It's been years and I haven't seen him. She was talking about my father, I realized with rising excitement. She never talked about my father. She mostly didn't talk about Meredith's either, but he sent money, so she did mention him occasionally. Her fingertips were cold, and I covered them between my hands for a moment and then unfolded both our palms again. Is he here? I'd already forgotten which was heart and which was head and picked a shadowed crease more or less at random. Oh, maybe, she said, holding her hand out so she could see it better in the white LCD glow of the lantern, because that crosses my lifeline. Some men are just bad. They want to drain your life out. He showed me his face, and I pretended not to see it, which is never a good idea. Was he worse than the man who wanted to take away your color? They were the same, each in their own way. Honey, I'm getting really sleepy. Can you put yourself to bed? I slid off the bed, gave her a kiss goodnight, and went over to my own side of the camper and got into bed. Did you brush your teeth? Meredith asked when she came in a few minutes later. Yes, I lied. Okay, she said. I think Mom will feel better in the morning. I stretched out my hands in the light of Meredith's flashlight. I didn't see anything Mom hadn't told me, but I felt like I understood better now how her readings worked. And I was going to stop there.
Yay!
Thank
That
you.
was awesome. You do the mom voice really well. This is like the terrible part about being parents, right? We all know.
Yeah, I'm an expert at the mom. I'm a natural at the mom voice.
Right. Oh my gosh. I have to say, when I was a kid and my brother was the science fiction fan, he's 8 years older than me, so he was really old, really old. And he was trying to explain the theory of relativity to me, and like drew like the planet and people on the planet, and then like the ship going away and all this stuff. And he said, well, and then time slows, this happens and time slows down for them and not for us. And I was like, I think I started crying. I was like, that's terrible. Why would anybody ever want to do that? But I'm a big mushball, really, when it comes down to it. It turns out. So I'm not going to Mars. Not going to Mars at all. So, okay. Let me see. We don't have any questions queued up yet. People should put questions in the Q&A. I mean, we will chat no matter what, because I always have questions. But Naomi, did you say this is part of the Ren Fair novella thing? What is this part of?
It's a novella. It was part of a novella, which is not an unpublished.
It's the unpublished one, right?
Unpublished novella.
So this is still seeking a home.
It is.
Right? It's really good. I knew that you had one out there that was waiting for.
Yeah. Novellas are hard to sell. Like,
I'm surprised though, because it used to be that they were impossible, right? You couldn't fit them in the digest, and nobody would print anything that small because it wasn't worth the money, and they were like pushing the boundaries, and we're talking early 2000s, like they were pushing the boundaries of how much you could fit into a hardcover or a paperback, because the fantasy books were 1,000, 1,200 pages, and Tom Doherty, who founded Tor, of course, was lamenting the ace doubles and like the novellas and how they were the perfect length and all this stuff. And then it sort of happened, like after all of this, why can't we do novellas, that printing changed enough to like make that happen, that it was easier, and that you don't have to, like, that the printing capabilities and the flexibility in it, and print on demand and all these things were supposed to be making it easier, better, or something. Sorry, I'm gonna sneeze. I have this like impending sneeze feeling. I'm just gonna talk through it, you guys. It'll be okay. But so I'm surprised to hear you say that. Sorry, that was like not a question. That was just like me ranting about how.
I cannot explain anything about the publishing industry. So,
right, I mean, like Subterranean has a novella.
Yeah, novelettes too these days.
Really novelettes
and novellas, the weird spot in between.
Yeah.
See, I think there are a couple of questions that
there are questions coming. I was giving them time.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Sorry, I don't want to jump the novella talk.
No, you're good. You're good. See how I stalled for them? Okay, here we go. Question for you both. You both know how to do such engaging characters, very easy to identify with their emotional arc. How do you work on building characters for your stories? I wonder if that's like character development or actually like building the character set, like the characteristic set for them. Does anyone want to tag in on that?
A lot of my stories start with a character arc. Like they start with like a situation for a character. Like this came out of the idea for this novella was a friend of mine told me about a personal ad she saw in the 1980s that was like a woman who described herself as being born in the call as like evidence for her psychic powers. Basically, it was a personal ad, and I don't remember if it was the weird little new agey newspaper in our area or the gay one. Anyway, this got me thinking about like, what if you were born in the call and that made your mom convinced that you were going to have like fancy psychic powers and you did not? Like, what would it be like to sort of have this, have the mom that was like, you're going to develop these powers. You're going to be like, you're going to have all this like, magic in your life, and you were actually very mundane. And also, what would it be like to be this person's sister, like the less favored child, the kid that's like, kind of shunted aside. And what if that kid did have magic powers? So like that's sort of like that's like that question, and thinking about how that would feel for like all the people involved in this story was where that idea arose from. So
right.
And do you base that off of personal stuff, or was this fully formed in your head? Did it pop in there, or
okay, so let's see. I thought it would also be fun to write about a Renaissance festival, because Ren fairs are such a weird liminal space where it feels like you could have fairies and magic happening and like no one would notice. They just sort of blend
right.
with all the ambient weirdness of a Ren fest, and the fact that they happen all over the country and there's like a whole circuit that people travel on is really kind of like interesting. And the and yeah, the relationship between the sisters was something that I thought would be really interesting to explore. And like, and I've definitely known people, like, I mean, my parents were great. But I've definitely known people whose parents like had expectations of them that they felt unable to like ever meet, whatever those were. So like that was also a piece of it. I don't know.
What
Like,
about you,
Wait,
Thomas?
do
what
you have
about
a
you?
sister? Do you have a sister as well, or?
Oh yeah, I have a sister and a brother.
Yeah. I was gonna say it felt very real, so I was like,
Oh yeah, I'm the oldest, but yeah, I have a younger sister and a younger brother.
got it.
What about you and building characters, Thomas?
Yeah, I was gonna say a similar thing, to be honest. I think it starts with the characters for me. I actually usually write more horror-filled stuff and dread and creeping stuff, but it's all a lot longer. It didn't fit the time window. So the one I read is actually kind of an outlier. Um, but typically I'm a very bright, sunshiny guy, so I always start with some weakness or flaw. Typically, there's usually a problem with someone and something they're dealing with, especially with horror, dark fantasy, and that sort of thing. And that's where I begin. And a lot of times they're based off of, things that I know or have been thinking about that just really bug me. And that's the only way I can get it out, I think. Um, but for this story, yeah, I don't know. I think this one was just an amalgamation of different experiences and things that I put together. But again, not typical.
Right. So most of your stuff is horror.
Horror leaning. I can't really categorize well. I leave it to other people to tell me what box it is, but I think most people would say it's on the unpleasant, darker side typically.
And what do you think is what draws you to writing inside of that space?
Someone asked me that recently and I tried to think of a good answer. I couldn't really. I think it's just a preference thing. I love really, bright, triumphant fiction. I love reading it as well, but something about it just doesn't fully click for me as a writer. Like my brain just tends to reject it. It doesn't feel real. I have to stop when someone does something too out of character or something that I just don't feel as real, but I realize it's super subjective and it comes from a, depressive brain that only sees things one way. So I think I just tend to work things out in a darker fashion, but I'm one of those people who they're two sides of the same coin. They're both valuable. I don't hate one and love the other. It's just for whatever reason in writing, it always comes out that direction.
Hmm.
What about you, Naomi? Do you have a
Like I was thinking about this. Like I don't I've written very little that even bordered horror. I don't read a ton of horror, and that's because I'm easily scared.
Mhm.
Like I didn't read Stephen King growing up because I was like I watched something even mildly scary and I started having trouble sleeping as a kid. So um but I mean I've read a lot of, I mean, recently, I will read short horror, and I've read some really great short horror. But I don't tend to write it.
Did you do a lot of political and nonfiction writing also? Do you ever intertwine any of the politics or anything in your fiction? Or,
Me?
yeah,
Um,
I mean that would be the horror, wouldn't it?
yeah. Yeah. Do I? It's like I've like tried to think of ways to intertwine the politics in my fiction without a lot of success. The main thing is that my very first novel, which was Freedom's not Freedom's Gate, no, it was Fires of the Faithful and Turning the Storm, was split into two novels by Bantam. They were published back in the early 2000s. Um, there's some politics stuff in those. But it was sort of more me thinking about how in a political movement, you don't necessarily get to choose who shows up. And a lot of the time people will really get on each other's nerves and have to like try to like like the main character winds up being sort of like the celebrated leader, largely because like all the other members of the resistance, when she shows up, are so irritated with each other that she's like the person everyone can just put up with because she's new and also she's young, and they figure they'll be able to influence her. So like, and that came out of like that came out of doing like Democratic Party stuff, but like in a very indirect way. So I've never tried to write about like a mayor or anything like that.
Right. So what are you both working on right now? What's up? What do we get to look forward to when we next?
I'm working on a different novella because apparently I had
You're gonna make this thing work.
And also a novelette, like simultaneously. I've been going back and forth between the two and working on them. I'm a little more optimistic about like getting the novelette out, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm every time I'm asked this question, I have nothing good to say. I'm just same thing. Short story grind, whenever I can. I got 3 little kids, so they're always running around. I can't do anything longer than like, I don't know, a few thousand words. Like that's sort of my limit. So for now, it's just kind of this as long as I can, I guess. Just keep trying to get stuff out there.
3 is a lot.
Oh yeah.
What are their ages?
3, 5, and 7. So they're having it's never a dull moment. It's always something going on.
That is impressive. Okay. What does that mean? I don't know if we have, let me see.
Leslie, you got muted.
Sorry. The last thing is, what are you reading and loving now?
I am reading Where Peace Was Lost by oh my God, Vanessa
Alden? No.
Yes, that's
Valdez?
right. And Vanessa Valdez. And I'm really enjoying it. I'm like a little over halfway through. It's like my friend Marissa described it as like, do you remember when the Jedi were cool? Like it's like back when the Jedi were, the Star Wars when the Jedi before the Jedi were awful. Anyway, it's got a lot of like interesting stuff about pacifism in it, and also like a very cool alien world with like some really funky alien life that they interact with, and an evil empire. It's fun. It's really fun. Liz,
Oh,
Liza, you're
I know,
still.
I keep muting myself because my dog is like over here pawing someone.
Oh,
Is it Valerie Valdez? Is it Valerie? Or is it Vanessa?
I could look this up.
I think we're very close.
muted again.
Valerie Valdez, and it's Where Peace Is Lost.
I have it on mute because he's literally like, he's a very good dog and he plays with himself, like with a ball with himself, and he will throw it and then chase after it, which is great. Like you can't imagine how amazing that is. But he's doing it right now, like at my feet. And so I'm like, no, he's in the other room. Like, so it's good. He's amazing. Okay, Thomas, what are you reading in that room?
I'm freezing like a deer in headlights. I should know. I every time someone asks you this, it's like, what's your favorite thing or what are you reading? And then like my mind just goes blank. But one of the things I read recently, relatively, is James Tiptree Jr., Alice Sheldon. I'm doing this a little bit later than I think most people, so I'm catching up on a lot of reading. I'm trying to like desperately read a bunch of stuff that a lot of people seem to have read already. And yeah, James Tiptree Jr., which is the pen name of Alice Sheldon, her work was really just really good, but so dark and twisted, but unlike anything I've read. And I know the one of the more famous ones is the screw fly solution. Oh, hey, hi. I finally read that one, and that one just I couldn't think afterwards. My jaw was on the floor. I was devastated. It was terrible, but good, terrible. So yeah, that's one of the things that I picked up.
Awesome. It's nice that there's like, it's hard to reread. It's hard to go back to some of the older stuff just because the time was so different. And I've had a really I would really struggle to go back and read some things that I really loved. So it's nice that there are some things that can still sort of blow your mind in a good way, and you have a good experience reading them. Okay, I think that's it. This is Toto. I'm sorry.
It's adorable.
He's
Oh,
cute, but he was like making a lot of. I don't even know how much noise the Zoom cuts out or doesn't, but it was making me crazy either way. So anyway, thank you both so much. I hope that tomorrow we have Cory Doctorow. I don't even have and Euphemia Giantafilou reading, and then we have, who's after that for you?
Oh, we have after that, we've got Ijang and Primi Mohammed.
Right, Ijang and Primi Mohammed is like a stellar lineup the whole time. And then on Saturday we have the awards, and so I hope that you and the panels, and it'll all be either in Zoom or on YouTube. So I hope that you can see some more of it. And I'm sorry you can't be here, because it'd be more fun if you were here. But
we're glad you're here.
Yep, maybe another year. Another year. And thank you so much for reading, and have a great evening. And we'll put this up.